There's a question that shapes every single decision you make, every relationship you stay in, every goal you either pursue or quietly abandon. You've never been asked it directly. No teacher wrote it on a board. No one sat you down and asked you to answer it. But your brain answered it a long time ago, probably before you were 12 years old, and whatever answer it landed on has been running quietly in the background of your life ever since. The question is this: when something goes wrong in your life, where does the cause live? Inside you, in your choices, your effort, your behavior, or outside you? In luck, in other people, in circumstances you did not choose and cannot control? Psychologists have a specific name for how you answer that question. They call it your locus of control. And the research on what it does to your health, your income, your relationships, your resilience, and your longevity is some of the most important and least discussed evidence in all of behavioral science that in the late 1950s, a psychologist at Ohio State University named Julian Rotter began developing a framework for understanding how people explain the events of their own lives. He proposed that people fall along a spectrum. At one end are those with a strong internal locus of control. They believe that what happens to them is largely the result of their own actions, decisions, and sustained effort. If they fail, they look inward. If they succeed, they attribute it to something they did. At the other end of the spectrum are those with a strong external locus of control. They believe that outcomes are primarily determined by forces outside themselves: fate, luck, other people, the system, timing, or circumstances beyond their reach. When they fail, it was because of something beyond them. When they succeed, it was fortunate, a matter of being in the right place. Most people sit somewhere in between, but where you sit changes everything about how your life unfolds. Rotter's original scale, developed in 1966, is still one of the most used instruments in personality research. What it has revealed over 7 decades of follow-up studies is genuinely difficult to overstate. People with a strong internal locus of control earn significantly more money over their lifetimes than those with an external orientation, controlling for education and initial income. They are physically healthier on average, have lower rates of depression and anxiety, recover faster from illness, and live longer. They report higher levels of relationship satisfaction. They are more likely to leave jobs or relationships that are damaging them because they believe their departure will actually change their situation. They are more likely to seek medical treatment early rather than waiting and hoping. They are more likely to study for an exam rather than hope for an easy test. They exercise more consistently. They save more money. They respond to failure by changing their behavior rather than by concluding that the outcome was inevitable. None of this is because internal people are smarter, more talented, or born luckier. It is because of how they interpret causality. The story you tell about why things happen determines what you do next. And what you do next is most of what determines your life. Here is what an external locus of control actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel like helplessness. That is the key misunderstanding. It feels like realism. It feels like you are the one paying attention, the one who has looked honestly at how the world actually works, who gets promoted, who gets lucky, who the system consistently rewards. It feels like other people are naive for thinking their effort matters so much. This is one of the reasons locus of control is so difficult to shift. The external orientation comes with a built-in justification structure that is very difficult to argue against, because it is at least partially correct. Luck is real. Privilege is real. Systemic barriers are real. The problem is not that external factors do not exist. The problem is what happens to your behavior when you treat them as the primary explanation for your outcomes. When you hand over causality to forces you cannot influence, you also hand over the only lever you actually have, your own response to what happens to you. What shapes where you land on this spectrum? The research points clearly toward early childhood experience. Children who grow up in environments where their actions reliably produce consistent consequences, where effort is noticed and rewarded, where mistakes lead to correction rather than chaos or punishment, tend to develop an internal orientation. Children who grow up in unpredictable environments, where outcomes seem random, where nothing they do reliably changes what happens, where love or danger arrived regardless of their behavior, tend to develop an external one. The child's brain is building a working model of causality. It is asking, does what I do actually matter? The answer it receives from its environment becomes a core belief that persists into adulthood without being consciously examined. This means that many adults are walking around with a causal model built for a world they no longer live in, making decisions based on an answer to a question they were never aware they were being asked. The research on what can shift locus of control is genuinely hopeful. Unlike many psychological traits, locus of control is highly responsive to structure experience. Studies in work settings, educational programs, clinical therapy, and even short-term behavioral interventions have all shown measurable movement toward an internal orientation when three conditions are present. First, the person must experience a consistent link between their specific actions and their outcomes, preferably in a domain where they care about the results. Second, that link must be made explicit, pointed out, named, and reflected back to them in real time, rather than left implicit. Third, the feedback loop must be tight, meaning the outcome must follow the action quickly enough for the connection to register. When all three are present, people shift, not dramatically overnight, but consistently and durably. They begin to narrate their experience differently. They begin to locate the cause of events closer to themselves, and their behavior changes in meaningful ways as a result. What you're dealing with is not a character flaw. It is not laziness, and it is not weakness. It is a mental model built in childhood, reinforced by the patterns of your adult life, and running constantly beneath every decision you make. The question is not whether you have one. Everyone has one. The question is whether the model you built in the past is still accurate for the life you're living now. Whether the answer your brain locked in before you were old enough to choose is still the right answer for who you are today. You have more control over your outcomes than the model tells you. Not total control, not immunity from circumstance or luck or the hard reality of the world, but more than a model gives you credit for. And the very fact that you're still here, still asking, still paying attention to how your mind works, is itself evidence that the lever exists and that you've been quietly, steadily reaching for it all along.